My name is Sunil Nagaraj, and as co-founder and co-chair of the NextGen Board, our goal has always been to bring more young folks into the museum, so it's great to see so many fresh faces here tonight. We have a really interesting topic. I think the title is T-0, Why Space Startups Are Taking Off. We have a distinguished panel. We're going to dive into what's going on with space startups, what's different, and should you get involved and how can you get involved. So I think it'll be a real treat tonight. So welcome to the panel, our three panelists. Come on stage, please. So as they walk on, I'll introduce them, and then they can say a little more. This is Chris Wake. He's head of business operations at Spire. We have Barry Matsumori, who's SVP of Business Development and Advanced Concepts at Virgin Galactic. And then we have Dan Berkenstock at Skybox. So before I let them share a little more, I'll tell you a little more about the NextGen Board. We were founded about 6 years ago, and we're a group of about 12 folks who put on events every 2 months or so. By signing up for tonight, you'll get our mailings about future events. And all of this is made possible by our generous sponsor, Jeremy Klein from Gunderson Dettmer is here to say a little more.
My name is Jeremy Klein. I work at Gunderson Dettmer. I'm a corporate attorney. Gunderson is the sponsor of this event. Some of you may know that Gunderson is one of the leading, if not the leading, law firm for representing high-growth, venture-backed companies. We get involved very early on. We help companies raise their seed rounds. We help them as they grow, bringing on employees, raising additional capital, entering into commercial contracts, license agreements, and so forth, all that boring stuff. Ultimately, maybe going public or being sold to a big company. In particular, I'm really excited personally that we're sponsoring this event because I'm a space enthusiast, although probably not as big of a space enthusiast as some of you. And we work with some really awesome space companies that I think are doing things that could be very, very transformative. Maybe in the next few years, maybe further down the road. With that, welcome everybody to the event, and I hope you enjoy the panel. Thank you.
Great. Well, let's get started. So tonight, the hashtag for the event will be CHM NextGen. CHM NextGen. So I'll start with you, Dan, at the end of the panel. Let's begin with what you do exactly, and just so we can get a sense of how knowledgeable on space or tech the crowd is, I want to show of hands. Who here has worked in or around space? Let's define that broadly. Okay, really pretty experienced crowd. Seems like about half, maybe a little more than half. And then
we're gonna have to get the whiteboard.
I know. Well, let's push that just a little bit further. Who here has interacted or seen a CubeSat satellite, a CubeSat before? Good. All right. Well, that helps. So, Dan, fire away. Please tell us more about a little bit about yourself and what you do at Skybox.
So, hi everybody. My name is Dan Berkenstock. I was the founding CEO of Skybox back in, I think early 2009. The world seemed to be a very different place back then. I don't think we would have ever attracted 130 people to a startup space event in Silicon Valley. One of the most fun things for me over the last 8 years is seeing just how mainstream some of these ideas have become and how many great new ideas there are being both generated and invested in. I'm excited to learn more about some of those tonight. So at Skybox, I've done a little bit of everything from getting the kegs in the early days, to raising the money, to convincing people to come join us, which was fun, and then just really building a company brick by brick by brick. It's sexy in the movies, but as anybody here knows who's actually built a company, they really are built on a lot of days and a lot of long nights and a lot of walks around the block and a lot of just pushing things forward slowly. And so last year we were acquired by Google, which was very exciting. And we're having a great time over there. We're actually right now exactly in between my old office at Skybox, which is about 3 blocks that way, and my new office at Google, which is about 3 blocks that way. I always wondered what the equal point was between those two. Now I know. And we're thinking about how we can take the data from our first 2 satellites, SkySats 1 and 2, which have been operational for about 2 years now. We've done over 50,000 image collections off of those, and scale up as we launch our next 10 plus satellites next year to begin really thinking about how we can take high resolution sub-meter imagery and begin to help decision makers make use of the data
Dan, before we go on, we ask you 2 more questions. How large is one of your satellites, and tell us what sub-meter imagery means in terms of the practical things we can see on Earth.
Right, so our satellites are about the size of a large dorm refrigerator. So we're not building CubeSats, but we're also not building traditional large satellites. So one of our satellites is about 80 or 90 kilograms, and our first 2 satellites capture imagery at 90 meter ground central distance, which means that we projected one of our pixels onto the ground, and one of these squares, that square would be 90 centimeters by 90 centimeters. We capture that imagery in panchromatic, red, green, blue, near infrared. We capture video. We've done some video at nighttime, which is pretty interesting. Lots to see things like lights on the Vegas Strip. So that's outside. By the way, Bessemer Venture Partners was an investor of ours, an amazing group of people to work with. Anybody here that's thinking about or starting a space company, please talk about that.
And one last point I'll make, because we'll come back to this later. I think you raised about $80 million and you sold for $500 million in total about 5 or 6 years. So we'll come back to what that means for the industry in a little bit. So Barry, please tell us more about Virgin Galactic and what you do there.
All right. So I'm Barry Matsumori. Great to see you folks. You notice I have my phone with me. These days when you have these events, you need to see how you're doing in real time with tweets. So it's really interesting. Let's see. I am actually relatively new at Virgin about 2 months now. Prior to that, I spent almost 4 years at SpaceX. So I went from big rockets, lifting big things, and now at a much smaller rocket, lifting much smaller things. What's interesting though is, if you will, the big rocket industry, the things that are big, are pretty much predictable now what they are. It's not like there's this new revolution of big satellites and what they're going to go do. That business is very sound, it's very solid, but it's also not changing a whole lot. What's changing a whole lot is the small sat market and what can be done with it. And kind of just early days of the possibilities. I mean, one of the things that I was a proponent of when I was in the big rocket business is the industry is too slow. My history is mostly with Qualcomm for the last 20 years, and the technology cycle was like 6 to 9 months, and the technology cycle on rockets is like not even an order of magnitude. It's not 6 to 9 years, it's like 20 years. So without that element of technology advancement, it's a dead industry. Well, you know what's happening? We have the small sat market, we have small launchers, and that industry is actually quite alive and vibrant. So that's pretty cool. At Virgin Galactic, we have 2 product lines. We have our space tourism product line, White Knight 2, Spaceship 2, and we are busy getting Spaceship 2. White Knight 2 was refurbished, and it's about to go and fly shortly. Spaceship 2, we built a new one, and we will get through a test program and get back into flight in short order. The real key, though, is our test program. We're going to make really sure that our customers are safe. On the other business, it's Launcher 1, and it's launching small sats. So in the realm of 200, 300, up to 500 kilograms worth of a satellite, depends on the orbit, and launching off a commercial aircraft. So we haven't announced the aircraft yet, but it is a well-known aircraft. It will host Launcher 1, and it will release Launcher 1 at somewhere around 35,000 feet, and Launcher 1 will go into space and inject a small set into orbit. So I mentioned I'm at Virgin Galactic for a couple months. I have 2 jobs. One is business development. It's a euphemism for I'm responsible for getting money into the company, so revenue company. And the second part is advanced concepts, and that's really interesting. And that's the future roadmap for Virgin Galactic. That's what I'm responsible for, both on humans and on cargo. So I have pretty big visions about what this company can go do, and it's going to be really interesting. Thanks.
So to recap, product 1, you're going to drop people from a plane and shoot them on a rocket for a few minutes.
Drop is not the word. Release. Drop is like, an accident. Release.
It's all about wording. And then product 2 is a very similar scheme, but with payloads that you'll take to market. Tell us, how much does it cost if someone wants to sign up to go to on the suborbital flight that you're doing, the space
On the
tourism?
suborbital flight, first of all, we have back order 700 plus people. It will take us some time to work that backlog off. It's $250,000 to go. suborbital flight. We have, if I go to a tangent, what's really interesting is the people that we're launching are fairly substantial, obviously. And what's interesting, if you take a social media perspective, if you multiply the number of followers they have on Twitter, it's actually a pretty substantial number. And I'd suggest that it's probably more substantial than much of what's the customers' followers. So it's kind of interesting what we're doing in terms of affecting a broader consumer space. You asked about Launcher 1. So Launcher 1, I haven't released all the pricing yet, but we have a reference pricing that if you have 200 kilograms that wants to go to 500 kilometers for a sun-synchronous orbit, it's less than $10 million. I haven't figured out how much less. That's somewhere in that part. If you go up and you want to go up to 500 or lower, there's a curve. People ask, so does the curve go exponential or does it go asymptotical? I said, we're going to tend towards asymptotical.
And last item, congratulations. This week you won a NASA launch contract for $6 million. Yeah, very big deal.
Yeah, thanks.
So Chris, please tell us more about Spire, what Spire does, and what you do there.
Sure. So I'm head of business operations at Spire. Basically, I like to describe myself as an ER doctor, so I triage a lot of things. I know enough about a lot of areas to basically triage and then pull in the experts when we need them. So if you think about it as a split house, you have engineering, you have operations. I'm one of those splits. So I've been there since the beginning. Joined the founders when there were 3 people in a garage, literally. We started out of Lemnos Labs, for those that are familiar. We actually were right next to a hamburger making machine, so we got a free lunch when I started. It was great. Though we were also known by a different name at that point. So we've changed that, and then to kind of give you background on what we do, we focus on small CubeSats. So we're launching shoebox-sized satellites and basically focusing those on signal intelligence. So I like to say that we're kind of a data company masquerading as a satellite company, in the sense that we also focus on kind of the value add that you can get from the data that comes out of these satellites. So we build a bunch of shoebox-sized satellites, deploy them very quickly. We actually have a design, build, deployment cycle that can be measured in weeks as opposed to months or years. You put up many of these into a network, and you get true global coverage, allowing you to basically get fresh data every 20 or 30 minutes. We focus with that data on maritime intelligence and weather. So on the maritime intelligence side, we have commercial ships. We can tell you where every commercial ship is on the face of the planet multiple times per hour, basically giving you a clear understanding, or the clearest understanding of global trade that's ever existed. We consider how much of global trade, close to 90%, for those who care, transits via ocean-going cargo vessel. And then on the weather side, we give you ready updates on kind of global weather patterns as they evolve.
So I think it was 18 days ago, something special happened at Spire. Why don't you tell us what that was?
So 18 days ago, we so we launched 4 satellites just recently, and have a number of additional satellites going up between now and the first part of the year, and then it's monthly for then until sometime in the future. Basically deploying a constellation of satellites that will go north of 100, kind of at the peak. The idea being that we put up more than 100 satellites, we can get to near real-time coverage over the Earth, and then we constantly upgrade and replace those satellites in the network.
Very cool.
And actually, I would be remiss if I didn't say that I now have a satellite in orbit that's named after me. So one of the 4 is the Chris satellite.
That's great. Way better than having Star named after you. So there's 1,200 satellites in orbit. You're one of them. Okay, so Dan, your company takes pictures. I'm going to reduce everything to dead simple terms. Barry, your company takes people to space and eventually payloads to space. And Chris, your company listens to the signals from boats and listens to GPS to make better weather predictions. Great. So let's dive in to my real questions here. As we hear about these companies, I'm curious, what's changed to make this possible? What are the trends that you think were in your favor to make what you did able to be started or able to be successful Another way to ask the question is, could you have done this 10 years ago, what you're doing today? Anyone who wants to respond?
The big changes, or a couple of the big changes that happened for us. So the CubeSat form factor is one. Basically, for those that don't know, CubeSat is a standard form factor satellite. It's actually a 10 centimeter cube that you can then stick together like Legos so that you can launch multiple cubes together to make a larger satellite. Well, that form factor came about, and it's actually allowed a lot of things to happen, including access to launch capacity, which has increased. So now they basically are able to slot in these CubeSats into launch vehicles where they want to reserve space for ballast, so sand and water. To even out weight distribution, you can now slot in these standard form factor satellites. Great arbitrage opportunity for those out there. Gives you kind of greater access to launch capacity, and then
It's definitely not launching sand.
I wouldn't expect
My old company, but not this company.
It gives you access to capacity, and then separately, when you're working within a standard form factor, you can actually start to use technology from off-the-shelf components or off-the-shelf electronics. So the consumer electronics trend and everything that's happening around Moore's Law here on Earth, we're able to leverage in space in a way that wasn't before possible because we're changing the business model which we are applying space tech. So for us, the satellites that are going up are built in a very short period of time, applying a software-like approach to development, and they're out there for about 2 years, as opposed to 15, 20 years with a traditional satellite. The idea being that you want to continually, iterate on the tech that you have so that you get better and better data over time. So for us, it was right time, right place, kind of jumping into the market with the access to launch, the change in kind of the technology space and how fast it's advancing, and then also just looking at how global we are today, and global in the sense of people, and yet not necessarily global in the sense of the data that we're able to capture. So when we looked at kind of market opportunities, we realized that 99% of the data that we capture from Earth is actually captured from roughly the 25% of the planet covered by land. And you have this whole big space over all the oceans where we're not really capturing data on a consistent basis. So with many satellites in the network, we have capacity.
I want to go over one thing you said. Who here has played with an Arduino firsthand? So tell us a little more about, you said consumer electronics, specifically if you can speak to the Arduino part of it.
Sure. So our first couple satellites actually ran on Arduino. So we launched a Kickstarter campaign for ArduSat and launched the first ever crowdfunded satellites through ArduSat, and then separately ran Arduino in space. So we were literally eating our own dog food and taking something that we were familiar with and had used in other capacities and applying it to a new realm, in this case space.
So, Dan, Barry, anything change?
Well, I think what's really incredible is not just the technology revolution that's happened with the CubeSat form factor. I think that was strongly driven from universities starting in the late 90s and kind of into the first half of the 2000s. The really interesting flip in my mind is, we've gone through this first phase of new satellites that were based primarily in the academic sector. And then in 2009, 2010, we entered the second phase where suddenly these technologies were being commercialized. And for the first time, they were beginning to attract the type of investment that was required to get anything, even something small, in space. And that's really been an incredible revolution in the last 5 or 6 years. And the fact that today there are venture capital firms that have a space practice. When we went out and started pitching venture capitalists in 2009 on putting small satellites into space, everybody seemed to have an uncle or a cousin that worked in the aerospace industry, but nobody knew somebody that had invested, certainly not successfully, in the aerospace industry. And in a investment climate where people tend to follow trends, there had to be some people who were willing to take the first leaps in order to get the ball rolling. And I think that it's incredible to watch that transformation over the last 5 years, to see all these companies that have gone out and have successfully raised money. And I think that what's really changed for somebody that's considering starting a new space company today is the fact that they have that relatively ready access to capital, at least to begin the journey. And that certainly wouldn't have existed 10 years ago. I think as we get more capital into this space, the value of more ideas can be tested. As the value of more ideas are tested, more of those will become real businesses. I think that's really the third phase, which we're only at the very tip of the iceberg on today, which is can these revolutions in technologies which have gone into space become revolutions in businesses which can be sustainable for the long term. And I think that's going to be an incredibly interesting story to watch unfold over the next 5 to 10 years.
That's interesting. We've always kind of held to the idea that people don't necessarily invest in space so much as the value that you can get out of it. I'd be curious to understand how do you think about that? Because what we've seen is that it's really about having a business model and having an approach.
Absolutely. Right. Nobody invests in a satellite alone. You have to have the business model to be able to support the investment. Absolutely. But I think there is something to space is sexy. There is something, especially there's something people saying, we've got a space company in our portfolio. You got a space company in your portfolio, right? Oh, you don't? Really? Oh, you guys gotta get one. Really? It's interesting in the real world the way these kind of things unfold. There is that that X factor element as well.
I'll add that what's really different for the broader industry, so I want to include people like NASA in it, is risk profile. People are taking risks in space they never took before. NASA, I have to compliment them, my former company, this thing called commercial cargo, taking cargo to space on a commercial contract, just profound. Taking crew to space on a commercial contract. For NASA, that's huge for a government organization to even think about that. That entire attitude is reflected throughout the industry, where people are accepting risk profiles that 15, 20 years ago they wouldn't even think about because they had to be so concerned. Granted, there's money, there's all this, but if people aren't taking risk, new things don't happen.
So I think it was you, Dan, that mentioned the idea of business models. Several people ask me, as I actively invest in space, is this just a whole lot of hype and enthusiasm? Is it like the 90s, or are the business models real? I'd love to hear your take on what you see different and how robust your own, which you're obviously biased on, but other startups you see in the area, how robust the business models are.
I think that's a great question, and nobody can stand up and answer with true confidence today. There's no new space company that has a publicly audited quarterly financial statement. There's not, to my knowledge, any new space company that's closed a growth equity round from the type of later stage investors beyond venture capitalists that require cold hard earnings and discounted cash flows to justify valuations and the like. And I think that we'll see those things, I hope, in the near term. But I think that until we do, it's speculation. Now, I think what is true is that things are changing in the industry away from models that have traditionally been one-to-one models to one-to-many models. Aerospace has always been about one company, a product has one customer, and that's not scalable. It doesn't allow for risk. It doesn't allow for innovation. And certainly, the business models that are being tested today are much more of a one-to-many model. We capture one type of data. We're able to sell that data over and over again to a number of different users. We're able to take advantage of all the cloud and other technologies that allow us to crowdsource the ideas to create value out of that raw data. And I think that's very exciting. I think it's consistent with a lot of other areas in the last 10 years that there should be a successful business model in there. But I think there will be some proof in the pudding.
So this one-to-one, and if that one is the government,
right? Yeah,
that's not a model.
Yeah, one to mine is one.
Yes.
Great. Well, can you comment on SpaceX?
Let me go on another point.
Oh, okay, all right.
So unfortunately, way back when, I actually was one of the founding people on a company on a constellation called Gold Star, and our business model was very sound on paper, and obviously it wasn't. So I agree with you. It's still early days, and we'll have to find out how this all goes. It looks very good. It looks much more promising than anything that we did in the past. But you can make paper work. Paper isn't it. It actually has to come out in the real wash. And you were asking me about Virgin and...
Oh, you're talking about one customer. So
Yes.
let me zoom out a second. So my understanding is many contractors, defense contractors, Boeing, Lockheed, et cetera, sell to one customer, namely the
Yes.
U.S. government.
Yes.
Most of the rockets that launch from the U.S. are United Launch Alliance, relay rockets. And they sell again to one general customer. I want you to comment about SpaceX. Does SpaceX have one customer? Does that matter? Given you spent several years there.
Yeah, I have to be careful about commentary I make on SpaceX.
Oh, yeah.
That's my first, because it's my former employer, and they have rights and privileges about information. That's their basis. When I was there, we built a backlog that is now close to $7 billion. A large part of that is the U.S. government, but a large part of that is the rest of the world. My tenure, I think I signed up somewhere around 20 or 25 launches. That's, for a big launch, that's a whole bunch of launches that are commercial. So it definitely has sound financial basis of why it's
Chris, any comments on business models?
Well, I'd say that we fall into the category of those that are venture-backed, and we feel that we have a strong business model based on kind of everything that's happened before us. So we sell data at the end of the day. So speaking about one to many, the idea for us is that we're pulling in all the signal intelligence and we're selling kind of access to that data through a subscription. Pretty simple. It sounds like a lot of services that we sign up for every single day on the SaaS side. So based on that, if we can capture the data that we're aiming to capture, then we've vetted the market. It's massive. And I think it's just a matter of kind of providing the data then. As part of that as well, it comes down to somewhat infrastructure. So I think part of the change for us is that we've started to focus on temporal resolution, which I think is one of the changes that's happening in kind of the one-to-many space, and specifically with satellites. So temporal resolution being how fresh is the data that you're able to get. For us, we have this network of satellites that's able to pass over every point on Earth very quickly in real time, or single-digit minutes. And then with that, you have to have the ground network to support that. So you have to be able to get the data down from those satellites and deliver it to customers. I think some of the supporting factors that have come up, the cloud, so being able to deliver things very quickly via the cloud. But then separately having a ground support network, or ground station network, so these antennas on far-flung locations around the world that can actually capture and transmit that data back. So one of the things that we did very early on is we actually went out and started deploying our own ground network to capture that data. Because when we started to look at the market, you realized that kind of the legacy model was that you would have large data dumps at either of the poles, and you would get updates maybe every 12 hours, maybe 24 hours, and you'd pay more than it costs us today to launch a satellite for one satellite's worth of coverage. So deploy these small antennas now, and you can actually get real-time data. So for us, the business models around selling kind of that real-time data back to folks that can use it.
So as we think about business models where you're focused on revenue and eventually profit, I'm curious where the role of space enthusiasm, being a space nut, being an astronomy nut, do you all like to hire people that are passionate about astronomy, or is that really a detractor and you'd rather sort of focus on pragmatic business people to hire into a company in these wave of new space startups?
I think it takes all stripes. I mean, I think the world's a better place when it's a diverse place, and I think that a lot of people don't know just how many of the United States satellites are built within like 5 miles of where we're sitting, between folks like Lockheed Martin, SSL, NASA Ames. I mean, this is an incredible hotbed of aerospace activity, has been for a very long time. That's probably why a lot of you are here this evening. And so I think that's a tremendous resource. Silicon Valley back in the 70s and 80s was about hardcore, extreme hardware, tough technology development projects. And I think it's been exciting to see some of that come back to the roots. And I know we for one at Skybox had a great cross section of people that were hardcore space nuts, people that come out of the aerospace industry, people that worked at places like SpaceX, or JPL or APL or NASA in the past. And we also had people who had never seen a satellite before, who had written JavaScript at a consumer company, and everything in between. And really what's amazing, I think, this kind of new era is seeing the random perturbations that happen when you put those different types of people together, instead of just an entire room of people that grew up, with the same processes and formats for reports in the aerospace industry, and aren't allowed to really make decisions until they're later in their career. Now we suddenly have just this enormous garden of all these different opinions flowering together, and I think that's a pretty incredible opportunity for us as an industry.
What I think is great is it's hard to find people in any industry, but it's great if you can say, I'm Virgin Galactic, would you like to work there?
Yeah.
And it's true for all of us.
Absolutely.
When you have this aspirational company with a vision, you can get people, because you want to hire the smartest people and draw from the biggest crowd. That's the only way we can do it.
Well, space is sexy, so there's this cherry on top factor that goes along with having hard problems and being able to solve those. And I think diversity of thought is a great one, so people of all stripes. We've actually had a lot of luck with folks outside of the aerospace industry, to be completely honest, just because you get that diversity of thought. You have people approaching problems from a very different standpoint, and then similarly, you're able to take other industries where you face similar problems in a different light. So, for instance, I've talked in the past about gaming. Gaming is one where you're focusing on hard problems, haven't been solved before. You're using a lot of low-level programming languages. You tend to have a very robust QA process, and you like to nerd out on sci-fi in some way, shape, or form. So if you can take that off of their screen and give it to them in real life, it's kind of a match made in heaven for everybody.
I second that one. I know I sought out people that have a good technical basis, but energy sector or telecom sector, not aerospace.
So, just to remind the audience, hashtag is CHM NextGen on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.
Very small.
There, just went off, yeah.
Oh, good, good. So at least one person's looking at it, but it also allows us to relive the event.
Yeah, I'm not paying attention to you, but.
So I want to ask one more question on business, and then we'll switch over to the technical side. So my understanding of Silicon Valley and what powers it is passionate entrepreneurs start companies, helpful VCs, give them money at some point, grow really quickly, and then at some point they get purchased by larger companies that are a little more mature, have a little more cash, and the cycle repeats. And actually the last part of the cycle is, let's pretend Google or Facebook, folks spin off from those companies and start new startups. So there's this beautiful virtuous cycle that's been powering Silicon Valley for 50 years. Is that happening in space, and where do you expect the exits to come from? Will Boeing, Lockheed, other defense contractors be making the purchases, or more Googles and Facebooks?
It's going to be good.
You guys bring a crystal ball?
I don't have a crystal ball, but it's
Terrible.
both. Do you see my former company, SpaceX, being acquired? No way. It's going to become a large entity to itself. Then there will be other large new age satellite companies, service companies, by the way, not necessarily satellite manufacturers, service companies that will have their own. And then there will be augmentation by existing players. But the existing players, some of them are definitely getting more, taking more risk. Many of them are still very risk averse.
I think it depends. I think it's hard to see a lot of exits coming from the traditional aerospace industry. I think the vocabulary and the language and the appetite for risk and the culture is just too different. Where I do see a lot of interesting things are really back to what are the business models and what are the use cases. I mean, today, the two primary use cases for space, at least in the commercial setting, are imaging and listening to one extent or another, communicating. And so I think that certainly imagery has come to be a currency in driving much of the new economy over the last 10 years. You think about all the maps that we use every day that fuel the transit of hundreds of millions, if not billions of people, and a number of very large companies that have spawned up. Obviously, communications are driving everything that happens in our economy, and I think there will be some very interesting opportunities for that in the next 3 to 5 years, and certainly a number of large vested telecommunications companies and others that have that scale of money. And I think that you're beginning to see these larger companies be willing to dive into the deep end of satellites because they're now seeing these companies as data companies who just happen to have satellites instead of satellite companies that like to pay lip service to data applications. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's also kind of interesting that, well, in one case you saw Planet Labs actually picked up Blackbridge, which you could consider a legacy satellite company in that case. So a new space company picked up a legacy company, which is kind of interesting.
I don't think anybody would have predicted that 8
That
years
was
ago.
Let's switch over. So let's talk about the technical side. I'm curious in the audience, how many folks here know how to code? Hands up. Okay, good group. So I'm curious, tell us more about the software lifecycle associated with New Space. What languages are used? Do you talk about Agile and sprints? Do you have product managers? Do you do testing the same way? And anything you want to talk about in software lifecycle, but I'd love to know specifics about how it works.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting challenges in building these projects is trying to marry Agile and Waterfall. I mean, you got a traditional Silicon Valley, industry that's on 2-week sprints, 3-week sprints, and they launch it when it's ready. You have the luxury of waiting until it's ready. In the aerospace industry, you have a launch, and the launch goes whether you're on it or not, especially if you're just ballast that's replacing the sand and water that would have been there. So, you do have to kind of do this delicate dance where you want to preserve the agility of these short sprint cycles of launching and iterating, of not starting your process with a 200-page requirements document that you're wedded to for the entire project. But at the same time, you've got to be ready on launch day because that rocket's going to go up, and if you don't have the code either on the satellite or on the ground to support it, you've got an empty box in space and pretty angry investors. And so that was a very active area for us that we spent a lot of time thinking about. We sort of had this internal term of schedule-driven agile, where we really tried to measure our team's velocities and cycle that back in our sprint planning, and then thinking about the top-level set of features that we needed in our 1.0 to support our initial 2 launches. But we did make a very clear choice early on to build almost all of our software in-house, or at least on top of open source. And we drive our first 2 satellites today and have for the last 24 months now through Chrome browsers in our Mission Operations Center, on code that we wrote in JavaScript with, we call them POPs, they're Python operating procedures. So our operators have a terminal window that that is in a browser but looks like a terminal, looks like you're running Python, although they're all pre-canned, pre-tested operations. And so we spent a lot of time early on, number one, gearing ourselves up to kind of take that, to take the risk of developing our own software, not relying on a legacy tool that eventually would not scale. And we learned a lot of our lessons along the way about how to combine the agility with the requirement to be there on schedule.
Yeah, you mentioned the ground state, the ground software. What about on the satellite? Are those basically Linux machines? Are they running traditional programming languages we use in the Valley?
Yeah, they're pretty similar as well. I mean, the satellites are a little bit more embedded, obviously, right? So, we're not running virtual machines on them, or and they're not being interacted with through a browser. But they're using the same type of languages and technology that drive our cars every day today, and it has an incredible amount more power, more resiliency, and more flexibility than satellites that are being launched even today by more traditional manufacturers.
If I can broaden it just a little bit,
Sure.
we have electronics, which you really can't separate the two anyway. But I talked about risk taking. Going to space, which classically everybody uses S-class components, as well as very robust schemes for software.
Can you S-class components define that?
They're tested to a no spec, so that they have a predicted lifetime in various environments, including radiation environments.
No risk.
Yeah, no risk. Super expensive. So if you went to Radio Shack for this power supply chip, and it cost you like $5 on Radio Shack, it would be $5,000 if it's S-class. That's and what people are doing in their spacecraft now is saying, you know what, I need another architecture. I'm going to use, as you mentioned, automobile class, industrial grade class parts, and all the architectures and structures to compensate for if I have a single event due to radiation. You know what? I'll fail a little bit, then I'll figure out a way to recover, as opposed to never fail. to me, some of this is complete new approaches to solve a problem that was before just one automatic way.
Well, that's flexibility when you are your own customer. Traditionally, people bought satellites from other people. They don't want to, lose those satellites. They write hundreds of pages worth of requirements documents. They give people zero flexibility to take risk. The beauty of these kind of newer companies that are end-to-end owners and operators that are selling the data to the final end user means that they've got the ability to control and to calibrate the level of risk that they're willing to take internally. And that is revolutionary. No one's ever been able to do that before. And now we have multiple examples of it that are driving some very interesting developments.
Yeah, we always call it reliability through resiliency. The idea being that you have resiliency through focusing on the network of the product as opposed to any individual satellite. So any failure can be compensated for through actually having the network of satellites. So kind of account for the level of failure in that.
Kind of along the same lines. If your architecture says I have a bunch of satellites and it's okay to have some fail because they're not that expensive, versus a $300 million satellite that cannot fail because you can't afford another one, it's just a completely different approach.
So I want to talk a little more about bugs. Some of the startups that I work with.
We write no bugs. What are you talking about?
Well, many of the startups I work with that have desktop apps, websites, you can push and update immediately, right? It's a continuous integration trend.
Yeah.
A lot of app companies complain that Apple takes 2 days, 7 days for approval, and that really changes everything about their flow. I'm curious with what you guys do. How quickly can you patch a bug? How much of the satellite can you, or rocket can you change completely on the fly? Or do you have to sort of do code complete like Microsoft 15 years ago, burn a gold master and then ship it and create something else?
We may have had an update like 15 minutes ago, so it's very frequent. So we can do updates on the fly the same way you can update your phone.
For any satellite in the house, right?
A rocket, once it's launched, is kind of hard to upload. So, and these guys probably wouldn't want to upload while we're on. So once, before launch, we would change it, but after that, it's not a long dance.
I don't know that I would want to hear about a bug.
Right, exactly.
Once it's off.
Right, yeah. Just don't tell them that. Just launch. We found a bug. Let it go. Yeah, I think we're somewhere in between. We do have a continuous integration environment. We could push, kind of at will, and we have in the past for, things like, we've had issues with the given release, and we want to fix it quickly. But I think in general we found that there's a pretty regular cadence. We're pushing things every few weeks. We can push 2 satellites to our ground infrastructure to anywhere in between, and in general that's been a good balance between having to make a tremendous investment in a pure automated safety net for continuous integration, versus being able to keep iterating the tools that people have to do their jobs every day and make sure that we're continuing to add new capabilities pretty frequently.
So, a fun fact, when we went to Mars, it was 2 years ago with the Curiosity rover, it takes 9 months to get there. So we launched the rover without, maybe there was some software on there, but it was pretty basic. And then the folks on the ground kept working for another 8 months.
Yeah.
And then light goes in 8 minutes, so you can transmit it the last minute. It's a pretty cool idea, especially because we talk about exoplanets and
Yeah.
cars are out there. But this idea of patching on the fly is great to see going into new space as well. Speaking of Mars, let's turn to the future. Please, if you have questions, prepare them, and we'll take them in just a minute. I'm thinking about the future, and I'm curious, what do you think is possible in new space in the next 5 years that isn't possible today? What are you looking forward to? Well, you can say Mars if you want.
Personally, I'm very interested in Spaceship Earth. It's still, we all have a vested interest in it. I believe that there are, an incredible number of applications that still exist for us to better understand what happens on our planet, how people live, how their lives can be improved, how they can communicate on a daily basis. And I think there's really a tremendous amount of opportunity in that space. That's one that's been very exciting and fulfilling for us to work on personally over the last 7 or 8 years, and I see a lot of other exciting companies coming up that I think have credible business models because they are serving the needs of people who do exist today. I think many of the other ideas, once you get beyond Earth, are exciting, or could be in the future, but are much more difficult to tie to an actual business plan, and are much more speculative in nature. And I think that, as Barry mentioned, we learned some important lessons in the late 90s. There was a lot of hype in the 90s about how satellites were going to change everything for everybody. A lot of money was put into them, and there were some very public and very large failures, which, quite frankly, held back the industry from new investment for a decade. And I think that we all have a tremendous responsibility, to be good stewards of the investments that people are putting into us, so that we can continue so that those investors will continue to keep investing in the next generations of entrepreneurs, and hopefully, keep some of the gains that we as an industry have made going forward.
I think the thing I'd add is, in a sense, we have, and other companies that are doing launch, that are providing space access, have a big responsibility. And that's, if we don't get reliable, on schedule, low-cost space access going, all of this will never really start. It's going to be a little bit flat with the existing access that is available now to everybody. So for me, if one makes the presumption that you can go up every month on the month, and it's actually like a bus. Actually, we are stealing a little bit of somebody else's name, but we want to provide the Uber service of space, and you'll actually be able to call up launch, because we're going to have it so frequently and so available. But with that in mind, and going to lower Earth, because I'm with you, I'm about looking down at Earth, the notion of space operations, of pharmaceuticals being done in space is actually real now. The notion of semiconductors in space is real. You start dreaming from there. So it's a big deal once you get really reliable access.
Yeah, I would agree with both those things. For us as well, it's all about kind of the here and now and focusing on what we've done and what we've done. So for us, we have this thing that goes around with every new person that joins the team. We have them ask 3 questions of everybody else, and we get this question a lot, like, what's the most exciting thing? For me, quite honestly, I always respond with the same thing, it's the weather. Selfishly, I look forward to having forecasts that don't go out for 7 days with reliability that falls off a cliff after 2, but instead being able to forecast the weather for, you start to think about 14, 20, 30 days out, and have a clear understanding of kind of what you're going to wear for the next couple days, which especially in San Francisco is very important. I started to think about the capabilities and kind of the implications of just improving capacity, what that would do if we had a clear understanding of truly this global system that's evolving all the time and relying on implications in Singapore affecting things in Florida.
So I'll have my last question, and then we'll turn to the audience. Everything we've talked about tonight, everything you're doing the last couple of years, what does this mean for the average techie in Silicon Valley? The average engineer, product manager, someone that works in marketing, does this matter? Is it open to them to look at for job prospects? Tell us what you think.
Definitely. And we've had so many people that have come in for a job interview, over the last 7 or 8 years, and said, God, I interviewed with like 10 Shat companies in the last 2 weeks. This is really cool. You got a satellite in your clean room, you've got boards on people's desks, like, this is awesome. And I think that in general that harkens back, Shat companies are important, but I think that does harken back to this, kind of formative era of Silicon Valley where it's about building stuff. And I think that that's happening in a lot of areas today. The 2000s were kind of the decade of the cloud and of open source and of software. And I think that teams are about hardware, whether it's in space or on the ground. I think there's really a hardware revolution underway. And I think that's a tremendous opportunity for anybody working in Silicon Valley right now.
I agree that hardware bit is supposed to just a pure software service play. I mean, we get people through, we show them how to do additive manufacturing with titanium combustion chamber on a rocket. They did not think about that after they were doing that. So,
yeah, I'd say being able to touch hardware for sure. Space is sexy, so being able to say that you work on satellites in space is pretty cool. Or with rockets, especially, and one of the big things that we talk about all the time is the fact that our product launches are strapped in the back of a rocket going to space. So you get fire coming out of your ass and you're going up one way or another. And so I think there's a lot of
We're still all kids at heart. We love things, noisy things, things with fire. Let's just have to control.
Absolutely.
All right, well, turn to the audience. If you have a question, please raise your hand. Yes, please shout.
Just an hour or so ago with somebody, and our biggest one, I'd say, is to some extent education. So space provides a lot of data and a lot of information on our planet today that people don't realize. So on the maritime side, for instance, we track commercial ships. Well, little known fact, but when you pass 50 miles off the coastline, you're off the grid. That's in a boat, that's in a plane, which is, the plane's terrifying, so I do a lot of international travel. But no one's really tracking you. No one has a clear understanding on a consistent basis where you are necessarily. So educating people about that, for one, and trying to kind of convey that when we say global today, we normally mean 25% roughly is covered by land. And then separately on the weather side, most of the weather data that we rely upon today, whether it's on your phone or on the evening news, comes from space. It comes from actually about 20 satellites that are providing the majority of that data. And we're in a position right now where the processing power of things here on Earth goes up. The effectiveness of the models that we're putting data into goes up, and the amount of actual raw data collection devices, or in this case satellites, is on a precipitous decline. And so putting in resources, whether it's money or focused on kind of building for the industry, whatever it is, or consistent launches that actually can get you there so that you can start to collect that data and to supplement it is imperative. Of education.
Challenges.
I think it's a similar vein. I mean, this room is filled with people that are interested in space, know about space. The general public knows nothing. But, I mean, it's still embarrassing that you'll ask fundamental space questions to the public and they can't answer them. So awareness is still a big problem.
We haven't heard anything said about debris in space, and all of you guys competing for the available space available, and presumably countries like India and China are doing the same thing. Has much thought been put into actually sweeping space of debris?
Sweeping, no. So Leo is an interesting place in that
Leo means what?
Leo, low Earth orbit, where we fly. All of us. So in effect, low Earth orbit is an interesting place, and I like to describe it as the sink in your, or the drain in your sink. So effectively, water is circling the drain and will eventually go down. So for us, the disposal process is one time, and in our case, it's a matter of a handful of years as opposed to the traditional satellite that's been up there for decades. And then two, it's mechanisms that kind of create additional drag so that you come down faster than expected, or can kind of expedite that process. So then when you also look at kind of the size of space is quite large. In the case of Leo, you can take an individual CubeSat in this case, and put CubeSats around one circle around the Earth, and you could effectively fit 30,000 of these CubeSats, and each will still be a mile from any other one. A lot of space up there. A lot of space at the bottom, a lot of space at the top.
Space and space.
Space is big.
I'll just mention what's kind of interesting is I just came from a conference on space, and I ran into two new startups, new space, small sats that are addressing orbital debris. And what's interesting about space is, in a sense, it doesn't take a whole lot of energy to deorbit something if you're at low Earth orbit. And so you need just to impart, the term is delta V, you just need to impart some force to slow this thing down, and gravity takes over. And these companies are doing small sat orbital debris mitigation by slowing these satellites down. And it's not coming from big guys, it's coming from small companies. And then I know you have another one that's going to address what to do with geostationary satellites, so those that are very high up. So it's actually kind of promising right now.
So a question for you, Dan, about this. So as I understand it, there's something like 50,000, there's 1,200 satellites on orbit between geostationary really far away in low Earth orbit. But there's 50,000 pieces of debris. I've heard that NORAD will send you a warning a day early in advance. Is this true? Tell us more about this. If the piece of debris is coming towards your satellite.
Yeah, I think that's true, but I also think that it depends, you know, as the satellite gets smaller, then it's harder to do as well. So, you know, if you have a large satellite or that's, you know, well known, you have a very tight relationship with them, you know, certainly it's something that they do help broker. We work with them primarily for support with launch. So when you launch a satellite, they'll provide you, you launch with a guess. So in our case, we launched our first two satellites from Russia, and the Russian groups that we work with told us like 3 months ahead of time where we should point in the sky and at what time to look for our satellites. And obviously a lot of things change in those 3 months. You know, maybe the satellite launches a second or two earlier or later, maybe it doesn't go to exactly the right spot, it's off by, you know, a few meters or even up to a kilometer or something. And so typically you have the satellite come over the horizon of one of your ground stations the first time after it launches, and you begin this sweeping pattern to search for it. If you're lucky, you find it on the first try. If not, you have to wait, you know, 7 or 8 hours until NORAD finds your satellite for you and says, we found your new, you know, floating piece of potential debris in space. Here's where you should look for it. Fortunately, we got lucky on both of ours. We found them on the first time they came over the horizon, but everybody was setting our expectations low.
NORAD's also a funny one too, because they say that they can track things the size of a softball. What that really means is they can track things the size of a golf ball.
I like Bay Area, the way space industries are going by taking very fast development cycle and everything, and this is reflecting very well in hardware. And day by day, more startups are coming, and it's moving away from traditional very core hardware, secretive research, and very core electronics and devices. How are you guys seeing that being opening to more international partner collaboration? And I mean, obviously, I'm coming from international background, and it matters a lot to me, but it matters a lot to industry as well. So, is the industry's push to growing out of ITAR? How much it matters to you?
That's been an enormous transformation in just the last few years. I mean, regulation is a huge part of any satellite company, from a communications point of view, from the orbiting point of view, from an ITAR point of view. For anybody that doesn't know, ITAR is International Trafficking and Arms Regulations. It's a set of laws that was passed in the late 90s after some somewhat embarrassing transfers of technical knowledge regarding satellites from the US to foreign countries. And for the first, you know, for most of our history at Skybox, like, we could not hire somebody without a green card, basically. And that was, you know, tremendously limiting for us. I mean, there's an incredible amount of talent that doesn't happen to have a green card. And it also made it very challenging for us to work with foreign suppliers, or really to bring, you know, people's knowledge to the table to help us make better products. And fortunately, there have been some changes in the last year where for a large class of satellites, that's really opened up, and they're no longer technically controlled under the ITAR. But for a very long time, that was, I think, a self-imposed, very strong tax, both in dollars and in knowledge that the U.S. applied against its own industry. And I'm applauding the fact that we've loosened those enough to the point where we can have a lot more collaboration and, you know, much better innovation because of it.
I'll address your point on the secretiveness and all that. You know, the fact is, if you want to make something cheap and reliable, it can't be a secret. It's got to be legacy design. And that's what's happening also in the industry is you want to get reliability and low cost. You go with things that are easy to do.
CubeSats are a bit different as well. So you can find open source projects for CubeSats as well. We don't have the same limitations as ITAR. We actually have 3 global offices, one in Singapore, one in Glasgow, and then here in San Francisco. We have, I think, last I looked, 18 different countries represented or something amongst our 70 people today. So there's definitely a lot of opportunity kind of in the space.
So I'm going to try and keep us on time. This might be our last question, but then I think our panelists will stick around for a little bit. Fire away.
Thank you, panel, for doing this. I just want to know, is there money in survival? What I want to know is, is there private efforts to go at the nearer asteroids that come and set us the way of the dinosaurs? Any of you guys doing anything about it? Any other companies that are working on it or venture capitalists?
The questions about near-Earth asteroids that might be fatal to us. Is there a commercial opportunity?
There are definitely companies out there. So Planetary Resources is a company that's talking about mining asteroids, and there are other companies that are looking at kind of opportunities to go farther afield. Kind of in and our focus is really within low Earth orbit and kind of more Earth-based. When you said survival, the first thing that came to my mind was like search and rescue on the ocean, and that, yes, there's definitely opportunities, but in terms of asteroids, I can't necessarily speak to it other than say that I've definitely come across quite a few companies that are focused further.
This gentleman's had a question the whole time he's raised his hand.
Okay, we'll break protocol and do one last question. But after this, again, the panelists will be up here, so I'm sure you'll have plenty of time to talk with the fire.
I have an idea. It's for maritime search and rescue. It came about because of the Malaysian Airlines crash. It's a fairly expensive device to build in a prototype stage. So my question to you is, I don't got any money. I think my physics package is very sound. What next step could I take to bring it about?
No question is, what should someone do if they have an idea or an early product in terms of
I think more broadly, what we did, we took a class at Stanford that was basically the So You Want to Do a VC-backed startup company class, and they brought in all these great people that were from law firms or venture capital companies, people that raised money in the past, and they worked with us to teach us the process. How do you put together the right business plan, the right level of fidelity, how do you put together a decent pitch so that you don't get kicked out of somebody's office the first time you go in there. How do you build the right network of advisors and other people around you to help give you credibility? And there's a bunch of great programs that have really gained in popularity in the Bay Area that are open to anyone. They don't have to be at a specific university. That you can go to a boot camp, you can go to a longer class. Your company can incubate there, for a small piece of equity. And I really encourage people to get involved with folks that have done it before. And that's really how we learn the ropes. And I think that's the best way to do it.
Great. We have a few thank yous. So first, thank you to the Computer History Museum for hosting this event tonight. I want to let you know that you've really just sort of skimmed the tip of the museum. The real exhibit, 25,000 square feet, is right behind me. So come by another time or for another event and we open up the exhibit. Big thank you to Gunderson Detmer for sponsoring tonight. And then finally, Dan, Barry, and Chris, thank you so much for sharing your wonderful thoughts with us. Appreciate it.